All right. We're back in the studio with a Little Crazy Podcast. I'm David McGee. With me once again is the Phoebe Goodwin.
Hey, David. How are you?
Do you like that, how I add the?
It makes me feel very special.
I'm sure there's some other Phoebe Goodwins out there, but you are the one and only in this studio for sure. Glad you're with us again. Today is such an important conversation because, you know, parents, even if you're not parents, maybe you're like me and you're a grandparent or you have friends or family. Parents today especially, I think, are increasingly asking and needing to ask, how do we better connect with our students, you know, in this world of heightened mental health awareness? And frankly, what students face today is not the same as it was yesterday.
Absolutely. And I think especially after COVID, when families were together and seeing more of each other and seeing more of the need of familial intervention in some ways. And after COVID, I feel like everything really shifted and that mental health conversation really began. And so I'm really excited for today's conversation.
And so for some students, even integrating back into a norm, and is the old cliche, it's a new normal, and really learning how to adapt to that. And there are some experts like our guest today who are, you know, working very closely in education with students. And he's great because he's also a parent. So we're going to have somebody you don't want to miss who's an educator or a parent. And I know we've got something to learn, especially if you're a parent. You're always wanting to know the common question of parents: how do I better reach my students? Today we have a guest who I'm so fortunate to have become friends with in this kind of journey we're doing about learning about students and schools and families. And I've been to his school, and I was most impressed. He is Pat Mulloy. He is head of the upper school at St. Paul's School for Boys in Brooklynville, Maryland. That's in the Baltimore greater region. St. Paul's was a special place because it's, I think, about to celebrate its 175th anniversary. And, you know, Pat is unique, and he's a learner in education, not unique in that he likes to get out and learn, and that's really how we're visiting here today. He's here on the University of Mississippi campus where we're based, learning more about some of the work we're doing at the William McGee Center. But also, he has two sons of his own in the school that he oversees, and one coming into his upper school this year. Pat, I'm so glad you're with us, and I'm just going to jump right in and ask you the hardest question. Are you nervous about leading a school that one of your sons is a student in?
What I often tell my wife is I thank the Lord that I'm having my eldest first in my division. If the youngest was the first one to pass through my division, it may be difficult. But no, I'm excited, and my rising ninth grade boy is excited. He wouldn't admit it out loud, but he's kind of excited to see his dad. I can't get too close to his friend group, but he's excited to be in a bit of my world next.
And so,
week.
how do you manage that? Because that's a good point. Because you have to be a father and a school leader, and that's a unique line to walk. You know, you're a school leader first, but that is your child there.
Right. And it's interesting because in the past week we're a few weeks away from the start of the school year up in the Mid-Atlantic, but the boys want the intel on who their advisor is weeks before their best friends.
Oh, they're trying to shake you down?
They want that confidential info. But I've mentioned to you, David, like what my one of my mentors, who you've actually crossed paths with, Howard Schindler at St. Paul School for Boys, who still subs for us from time to time. He's used the phrase, and that he gathered from some book he read at one point, about the evolution of a parent in a school journey is from manager to consultant. And I think for me, as Whip, William Patrick Mulloy IV, Whip enters my ninth grade, it is very, as my wife says, I've got to kind of put on that consultant hat, let him chart his own course. And that's kind of what I try to preach to every incoming freshman parent. But I think that I have to kind of look myself in the mirror every day of, am I that good consultant who is not trying to over-manage?
What a transition.
Absolutely.
That's crazy.
The consultant role is an important one because we parents want to control. and we want to order how we want things done. But I think most of us in our lives, if we look at where we've had the most growth and where we've had the most change, it's typically more in a mentor or coaching role. It's not that it can't occur in the other, but a mentor and coaching role, historically, I think for all of us, has the ability to bring out the best of us. We don't tend to push against it. We tend to come alongside it a little more, but it's not so easy to do, I don't think, as a parent. So I'm curious if you have, how do you do that as a parent? And maybe you're about to learn. And as you're advising parents, here you are at the upper school, and a lot of your work you have to do is really with parents as much as students, And so what's the process through that?
In all honesty, it's a lot of husband and wife feedback. I think that a lot of the success that I've had as an educator, if I go back to my 9th grade Western Civ course that I taught for the first year in the fall of 2002, I'm a planner. Give me the to-do list a mile long. Let me check those boxes. I'm going to map out a syllabus that takes us from August till May, till Memorial Day weekend. And so for the times when the boys were really little, figuring out when the daycare opens, who's going to be doing drop-off, who can manage, this pediatric checkup, that kind of skill set translates pretty good for that age. I think it's my wife has been a really good one who gets me to reflect of, at a certain point, was it when he turned 13, 14, let him make some choices. Being active is important, but letting him choose how he wants to be active, whether it's, for him this summer, a weekly hiking plan where he was going to figure out kind of the little hiking route. He's not the one who was going to I didn't need to be signing him up for the travel baseball or the golf lessons. He found his own path. And I think that high school really is, in one of that manager to consultant role is one that I will really have to embody, but I do share at that first orientation meeting because it's hard, because you eventually get to that journey with a college counselor and you go and put your parental feet on the ground of dozens of different college campuses, and all you want to do is draw the T-charts and the pros and the cons and lead your child to the right answer. But you really need to be the one who shows them perhaps a lot of different roads to go down, but be there to kind of walk with them as they choose their path. So it's not going to be easy for me, but I think that he'll probably help. I'll probably reap some benefits from him being in my division that'll help me be a better educator.
He might take you down some paths you didn't know.
Reduce some of the micromanaging tendencies, yes.
That's well said. Hey, what is the state of boys today? And I don't just mean at St. Paul's School for Boys. You have the gift of getting to work with educators and have a lot of discussions, just like this trip you're on here, to see and learn. But you do have the benefit both of fathering boys and at working at a very accomplished school for boys. What is the state of young men today, and what do they need?
For me, I go back to, as a lot of my leadership team, a phrase they often utilized before I ever got there was that of self-advocacy. Can we get these boys to drop into office hours at the after the Econ 101 professor wraps up and you have a ton of questions? Can you go find your way to his office hours on the following day? Can you go self-advocate for yourself when you're homesick? Can you go self-advocate for yourself when you think you've got the flu and need to go get some medication and Pedialyte at the CVS? Can you do those kinds of adulting things? It begins with you speaking up and asking for help. And so what I find is, I think with whether we can look at the role of screens, we can look at the way that COVID scrambled a lot of social skills progression for boys, and I'm just talking about friendship making skills, or maybe the middle school years are those prime years for dealing with getting cut from a team for the first time. And when that doesn't happen in your 7th, 8th grade year, and then you jump into an upper school experience, things get scrambled. So we're blessed to be in a smaller school setting at St. Paul's School for Boys, where we can focus on the calculus, we can focus on the higher level Spanish class, and then the chemistry lab. But we also have advisory time, retreats, community assembly time, a strong alumni network who always offer up their gifts, back to campus, that we can strategically align those extracurricular, not in the arts and athletic kind of vein, but those spaces between to really get those boys to work on those skills. And what you, David, and I have talked a lot about is I think for boys, being transparent and crystal clear, the advisory activity that's going to carry on into an assembly talk on fill in the blank topic, lay it out for the boys. I'm thinking of, for high school boys to identify what social skills muscles are really weak for them is a good skill.
Absolutely.
And that I often think about where can a coach, where can a teacher, going over as much as you may be that teacher who absolutely loves Napoleon, in that Western Civ course, in that AP European History course, the discussion, the critical thinking skills, the analytical skills you're doing in your unit on Napoleon, those you have to recognize that those are going to be as essential, probably more essential for that boy when he's in the undergraduate world and when he's in the real world.
Right. Wow.
So I feel like with a lot of my experience, just knowing young boys my age, older boys, emotional maturity is something that is so hard to develop because there's this stigma around men's mental health starting from a young age that boys don't cry, they don't get sad. There's this sort of belief that weakness isn't an option for boys. And so how does your school kind of protect boys from that stigma and encourage healthy emotional maturity?
A lot of it is connected to where can you showcase moments of vulnerability? Where can, I think, in advisory conversations, in those, our president of our school uses the phrase, the spaces in between. Where can in those moments you have adult males, adult females, any adult mentor in their lives, show them that being vulnerable, sharing about where they've made mistakes, where they've picked themselves, dusted themselves off, not just made a mistake and given up. So a little bit of resiliency as well. If you're going to develop and strengthen those resilient muscles, you got to let them be vulnerable. And in a boys setting, and as I've mentioned to David, I've went to sleepaway camp, a boys sleepaway camp. I was on sports teams. I was in a fraternity. But all I knew were co-ed academic settings. And when boys education is done really well, I really think about every classroom space being a space where boys can be vulnerable and boys can be very, very comfortable making a mistake. And it's up to teachers oftentimes of when are you creating those venues on the stage, on a choir, on the lacrosse field, where those underclassmen boys see the older boys. Like we have a tradition, and schools do have different versions of senior speeches or senior addresses or senior projects. But starting in the second quarter through the late in the spring, seniors get to address the entire upper school student body, a senior one at a time. Their advisor works with them. We have a senior rep who oversees kind of the editing, the making sure within time restraints. But those are moments where boys talk about gold medal moments. But I'd say the majority of moments they share are what they learned from when they were at their lowest. And in some ways, a silver lining around COVID was a shared vocabulary of every boy, and I would say every girl. I'm gendering it a little bit because oftentimes you get from boys, it's like the playing video games was maybe the only time I got to see a buddy for stretches for a week or two. And those were oftentimes the first times boys ever kind of came to a realization that they were struggling with something emotionally. And then it was incumbent upon us in the last couple of years as we came out of those, how to take those moments of reflection and say, good, you're sensing something about yourself. And then the next step is self-advocacy and asking for help. And in a small school setting, we have the benefit of, I've shared with David, our counseling program. St. Paul's Early Action Committee is a really wonderful way that boys can enlist support of other faculty mentors to help a friend with substances, with other, and we've expanded it over the years to self-harm. And so this way that it's very clearly laid out, it's going to a trusted group of teachers. It's not entering the principal's office, the dean's office.
Nothing punitive about it, right?
No.
It's just,
And that's, I think, again, in a very good way, handbooks across all different kinds of secondary schools have gone under the magnifying glass of what, a punitive measure accomplishes what? A restorative a restorative measure in a discipline procedure where conversations can happen, and sometimes detentions still get handed out.
Right. Right.
It can't be all restorative all the time. But I think of really good, healthy discussions that we've had around, for example, a medical leave policy of what happens when a boy that we want to see through to continue on the St. Paul's journey, but needs professional help or professional assistance from the outside. How can they still remain in our fold? And that's not just me.
It's a move away from the old days where schools used to think almost like if something happens, that'd be a discipline issue, or if you're having to go do that, well, this relationship is over. You're taking the empathetic, compassionate, we're here with you, we want you to be able to stay with us, if it's possible.
Right. And it's just a tangent to that is I think the healthy, again, something out of COVID or interesting economic environment right now where I'm thinking about the boy who is pursuing the HVAC certification or the boy who's pursuing gap year opportunities. Those are some interesting, difficult conversations sometimes to get started in an independent school environment. But I think that parents are growing more open to what does this time away at a restorative semester program out west, what might be the benefits for my boy to experience that and then return even more self-aware? Or my boy who's maybe not ready to be in the dorm as an 18-year-old college freshman, striking up those kind of, again, good consultant contract of maybe you're at home for a year before the dorm experience.
Although I'm just here to tell you, you find me this gentleman going to get HVAC certification, that's a genius. In this environment we're living in, I told somebody one day, how come everybody's not going into air conditioning? Because I've spent more money in recent years as we've been through all these heat waves on I've replaced like 4 air conditioning units, and some of them were new, and I'm thinking, this is a business.
Yeah, go ahead and get certified, David. It's not too late.
Yeah, I need to be an HVAC guy. I think there's a lot to be said for that. Phoebe, your point of you really got me on this concept of, and it's not just we're not stereotyping. It's not just young men, but it is well known that young men, they're social emotional learning. Some of us come along a little later and a little slower. You made me think about something from my youth that just happened 2 days ago. That I'm not in my youth. But you're asking about boys and social emotional learning, and it just kind of froze me and made me a little emotional. Not too many years ago, I had a memory. It was always there, and it wasn't a major, but it was major in terms of feelings hurt. because that's major if another person's on the other side. And I've had it done to me. It's been done. But if you do it to anybody once, you remember that feeling. You remember their hurt. And I remember hurting the feelings pretty significantly of a young lady in early high school. And I was going through a hard time. Something had been done to me, I pass it along. And I remember her being very upset. I remember her mother being upset. Like, I mean, you really hurt my daughter's feelings. And, you know, I'm young, and there was no next day beyond that moment of I hurt her feelings, and I didn't understand how to apologize. Because I couldn't quite get my arms around my own emotions. I'm 58 years old. I was 16 then, and so was she. And I learned recently that she'd been living away, that she lived back in this area. And I invited her to coffee. And she came. And she was so gracious. Before I could even look her in the eyes and say, I'm so sorry, she wrapped her arms around my neck and gave me the most caring, loving hug. And we had tears. And she was telling me it's okay before I was even able to say I'm sorry. And we both cried. Now, believe me, I got across from her face to face, and I said, I have so much care and respect for you, and I'm so sorry. And we laughed and we cried, and it was incredible. Of course I said it. But towards the end, I was kind of laughing. I was like, that day that I broke our date, this is that day, I guess, because I haven't seen you or spoken to you since. And so it took 42 years. And I just think about, I'm taking responsibility for me, but that role model really wasn't, I didn't have it. I didn't have a male role model. And so I was flying on my own out there. And so what you said really struck me. And I remember some of the mentors like my sons had at Macaulay and in church youth group, like we've talked about. And I can tell you, I had such a special visit at St. Paul's in the Baltimore area. And as I saw Pat and a lot of these faculty members that have been there for decades investing in these young men. And it's not just the classes, Pat, that are taught. What you're talking about really sticks with me about the spaces between the classes, the spaces between the practices. How do we help them grow instead of just throwing that to the wind? And I always wish for every young man, and every young woman, frankly, that had her feelings hurt, not to have to wait 42 years. You know what I mean?
Absolutely.
Because once I said it, it felt so easy. Like, I'm a grown man doing this. And I have to tell you, it was the most beautiful moment. Like, outside of my own immediate family, it was just 2 days ago. And this woman and I, who's my peer, and we both are like, I love you so much as a friend. I respect you so much. It had been 42 years. That's not the words that were said then. It just required, I'm so sorry. You know?
And I think forgiveness is something, and asking for forgiveness is something that's kind of gone down the drain recently, where people just don't own their
blame is
wrongdoing.
big right now.
Blame, or I'll just take the blame for it, or I'll take the shame and the guilt, or it'll just be awkward. And amends, I feel too difficult to make.
Yeah.
And so what does that process look like at St. Paul's obviously it's boys in school. There's going to be some hurt feelings or broken noses. What does that look like?
As you two are just talking, I often think about my dean, Kevin is a master of conversation. And when you often get, especially in a small setting, where even if you don't know your classmate, you kind of know them. And the no big deal. It was not a bit, what I said was not, and what Kevin's line is, and you've heard this in different kind of literature before, but you just don't know was he up at the vet's office at 10 p.m. last night putting down his family dog?
Right.
Is his older brother home from college because he flunked out? Are his parents going through a divorce? And the little ice chip you threw over the balcony onto his head, or the snide remark you made to him in the hallway, that may have been like the 11th bad thing. And maybe the straw that breaks a camel's back. I mean, it's just one of those, like, you don't know the magnitude. And you just, it really is kind of a basic golden rule of, that Kevin often goes back to, of it's just not something we need as part of our community. And then what Kevin also does a great job, and I think about other structures that have evolved in good ways over the years. Our honor council system, is it may look like a very judicial system still, but it's not the draconian system that I think existed 100 years ago. When you move through a restorative discipline process with conversations and some consequences, you do have, and you have to remind the boys, like a parent, your teachers are ready to coach you your coaches are ready to coach you the next day. They're ready to have you in their Algebra 2 class. They're ready for you to move, to turn the page, and learn from the process, and learn from this upper school journey. The scary thing that is, I don't want to be naive, because what scares boys, what scares girls, what scares parents is the one silly, misconstrued, or deliberately hurtful post that rips up a scholarship, that rips up an athletic opportunity, that rips up a job prospect, or ostracizes everybody's friend, a boy or girl's friends. That's a social media reality too, that I can't quite erase that. But the things within our control is we can always assure the boys of the adults in the building, going back to vulnerability, they've made their share of mistakes, and you're still a part of this community. And so work on the positives that you may need to do a little bit extra of to get back in the positive kind of column.
I had a young man, you made me think, Pat, when you're talking about, let's say a young person acts out aggressively. It's easy to think, well, why do you do that? And if you even ask them, a high school counselor told me recently of an example. A young man had gotten aggressive with another young man he thinks is flirting with his girlfriend. And they're like, you're not normally aggressive. Why did you do that? The immediate answer was, well, because he was flirting with my girlfriend. More questioning later. I love your example of that. What's upstream? What's going on? You don't know. But when you begin to get them away from that situation and take some air out of the situation, in this case, for example, and this was a big one, which you touched on, this young man had a brother who had been at the same school, who was all-state in wrestling, who'd gone on to this incredible scholarship in college, who was kind of the golden young man. And this young man was making the team, but wasn't all-state, wasn't all-district. And look, he, of course, has talents, probably some talents that he's yet to understand, because the school system, which just kind of has, here we're doing English, math, wrestling, lacrosse, volleyball. I mean, he may not even find it within that exact matrix. And so he then therefore feels, in comparison, I'm less than, when he's phenomenal. And he's feeling, and suddenly it comes out in aggression toward others. And so you don't always know what's upstream. And I think in, the social emotional learning is not a corny or silly thing. And it comes about through a lot of means, as you said. It comes through mentoring. It comes through role modeling in a classroom. It comes from peer to peer. It comes from we're with you. We see you, we hear you, we're with you, we're doing this together, and a lot of that can emerge. But usually there is something upstream.
And it's that it takes a village approach, you know, in a school setting. What is the coach seeing? What is the advisor seeing? Your parents, you know, are a constituency that you work with and you communicate with. What do two different content area teachers see very different sides of this boy? Why is that? And more systematic things, I think, where schools have grown is not just resting on your laurels. It's not just, I mean, I remember I was in Central Florida at the time when COVID began, the pandemic began, and it was literally our athletic rival, my principals of athletic rival schools, my peer group, who really we only talked to each other when our boys maybe did something, they made a mistake at one of their dances or something happened. We crossed paths disciplinary-wise. And now when everybody's classrooms were turning virtual and the whole world was being turned upside down, we had to say, what have you tried? What works? What doesn't work? Are you going to force the boys and the girls to turn on their cameras? Or if they're comfortable sitting in their apartment where their little siblings are on the couch next to them trying to do their learning, are you okay with them being on mute and camera off while lecture? Those are the kinds of, it takes a village, and that's carried until today. I mean, that's, you know, the summers spent, not just our Mid-Atlantic. I mean, David knows well, the IBSC International Boys School Coalition. For me, being new to a boys' school, it's the listening to what a boys' school in Madrid or Auckland in New Zealand has maybe experimented with or tried out, and maybe it didn't work, and they're sharing out that mistake. And that is not something that schools who admissions, you know, rates were good, classes were filled, giving was good. You assumed everything was just good. I think now there is just and obviously a piece of that is Zoom and how easy it is for me to hop on a call with a dozen other educators at boys' schools and listen to a presentation or listen to somebody just sharing out. You can borrow, you can share, you can lean on somebody. I need to give you a case study of what would you do in this X, Y, or Z situation. That wasn't something that I'm also lucky to be in such a geographic region in our country with so many fantastic boys' schools, girls' schools,
you do
co-ed
have, right,
schools.
yeah.
But even if I was in a different part of the country, I would have, through the pandemic, learned to lean on each other. And that isn't necessarily one of my skill sets.
But Phoebe, I'll tell you this in the learning culture. So as I said, you know, Pat in St. Paul's invited me to come speak, and they did what, you know, was such a humbling honor for me to help me get to know the school, but really get to share with all stakeholders, because it takes a real moment of trust. I spoke to the entire student body of the upper school. I spoke to a parents group and a large parents group. I met with faculty and staff. I mean, and alumni. And that's the entire stakeholder, you know, ecosystem of a 175-year-old school that has a lot of tradition. That was such an incredible honor to get to go in there. And so when I do, I'm trying my best to deliver my messaging, but I get to learn. The same way Pat is down here visiting the University of Mississippi and the McGee Center. So I get my eyes open. Let me tell you what I found. I mean, there's the obvious of mentorship relationships in young men among their, you know, near 600 students or so, and their small class sizes. And I saw so much in tradition, but so much in kind of forward thinking. But let me tell you, I had two things I've not stopped thinking about. One, this private school in the Baltimore area, they don't have to continue this tradition. In the middle school, they teach craft woodworking. Craft woodworking. It's not just algebra. It's not just prepping for calculus. They teach craft woodworking. I got one better. They teach beekeeping.
Oh my god.
Beekeeping. And
do you get to keep the honey?
You can buy the honey in the bookstore.
Oh,
you can
of course.
buy the honey in the bookstore.
I want some of that honey.
So anybody that's gonna, I got to tell you what's going to happen. I came away from that trip, and Pat followed up. He connected me with their beekeeping expert and woodworking. I gathered information. I researched it. I took it to some others in Mississippi, and the challenge you have when you're trying to get change made or get things done is you have to have a lack of impatience, and we've talked about this before, but at times you really have to have some patience to get it done. But I'm kind of a dog with a bone of some stuff, and we all kind of came up with this dreamy vision that we're going to take this old, prestigious, they probably don't like that word, achieving boys' school might be a better word, and we're going to partner like people at the University of Mississippi, and we're going to get in Mississippi in places like the Mississippi Delta, and I'm telling you it's going to happen. And when it does, we're going to talk about it right here on this podcast. We're going to go pilot some programs in Mississippi based on a partnership with these longtime faculty members, and one is younger at St. Paul's, and we're going to put together the best of Baltimore and the best of Mississippi, and we're going to pilot some programs of beekeeping and woodworking, and I'm saying it on the record right here to make sure it happens. It's unbelievable.
Wow.
I mean, that's learning.
Yeah, and working with your hands and providing for yourself and having a piece of art maybe that
and even
you made.
beekeeping, the sustainability. Think about like the
Absolutely.
Mississippi Delta, where crops and
Right.
And it's just a new way of learning. And that what I saw with the leaders of those classes, I saw that mentorship in kind of a different way, because they have, like around beekeeping, for example, there's all these life lessons. They're both ecological, but also life lessons, both in how the bees behave and how you have to do it. It's really stunning. This came out of St. Paul's School for Boys in the Baltimore area. Incredible.
And having hobbies that are maybe not seen as so masculine per se, like gentle.
Yeah.
You have to be so calm with the bees.
You have to
You're
be
making
so calm
art
with
with
these.
the wood and just showing. I think there's so much value in showing boys the importance of creativity and art, and also provision and
there's some
working with your
leadership
hands.
at the school to recognize that, sure, we'd been doing these for a lot of years, and it's a 21st century, to let's not walk away from it.
100%. And those, when I think of kind of our Experience Plus program as kind of the umbrella term, and it involves, upperclassmen science internships, lab visits to Johns Hopkins, things on that high level. But it's about exposure. It's about kind of professional connections. It's about, and I'm thinking about the woodworking class in the middle school, the beekeeping. There's a lot that you're putting in the boys' hands. And Whitney,
right.
who runs Point on Experience Plus, I do love her old school stressing of thank you notes.
Mm-hmm.
Oh.
And it's kind of in this world.
You mean
where
those are still around for
when,
young men?
When you are, and she has to coach the boys and to work on their penmanship a little bit.
Wow.
Maybe not to be too
I
gendered
should
about
go
it.
for both of these reasons, by the way.
But it is one of those, a closure for her, the follow-up. It's not just enjoy a great day and eat a nice box lunch at an architecture firm. It is say something specific, thank you, and do that first step. Take that first step of a relationship, a connection that is tangible. It's it's more tangible than kind of that quick check box on LinkedIn. It's a nice way that you've made a real effort. But what I'll share about David's visit that still sticks with me is I'm thinking about those spaces in between, after assembly, after chapel address, the 2 or 3 boys who just found the 5 or 10 minutes to just kind of seek you out, and they were not freshmen, if I remember. They were older,
Correct.
but they were kind of used to, in a good way, finding a trusted adult to have a little bit more of a conversation with, to learn a little bit more from, and them kind of find not the prompted, maybe more structured internship, but this was them just, while David had a break after lunch, they just wanted to have a little bit more of a share with him.
They're matching vulnerability to vulnerability, and for me, it's so impressive. I'll be honest. I remember those vividly, and they stick with me today. And I feel sure that apology I delivered 2 days ago, those kind of interactions with young men in the field help me, because you can be 58 years old and still growing up. We all are, and that's just the truth. And I appreciate that so much because I remember those vividly, and they were very special, and I learned from those. I'm such a stronger. I can say I'm more of a man than I even was then, and I even was because they helped me to grow too. They helped me to grow too.
Yeah.
Do you? Yeah. So before we get to you, do you have a fun question for us?
Yes. So, Pat, we spent so much time talking about your perspective as an educator and pouring into boys and seeing them grow into becoming men. And we have to go back to when you were in their shoes. Tell us about a teacher that you had when you were younger that made a big impact on your life.
So, Walt, and I'll share just his first name because he was my math was not my favorite subject. I'm a humanities guy, but Walt was my algebra 2, and I had 2 years of calculus as a junior and senior. So I had him multiple years. And I went back after college and taught at my alma mater, Kentucky Country Day School, where I had Walt, and then I became Walt's colleague. And Walt was the last colleague that I was able to call him by his first name. Because he was, at first glance, intimidating. I remember being a ninth grader. But what you noticed really early on about Walt was he was the first one in and the last one out. He was the first one in, and he would teach different levels of calculus and lower levels of math, SAT prep, like the first one to unlock the door. If you were going off to a morning lift and had to have 15 or 20 minutes of Algebra 2 prep before the next quiz, before you were lifting with the baseball team in the morning, he'd come in at that 6:45 to 7 time frame for you. And he was the last one out. He was the biggest cheerleader. And what always stuck with me about Walt is every boy, and I was in a co-ed setting, so every boy and girl, he was not just the teacher showing up at senior night. He was showing up whenever possible, middle school, JV, so that he knew every student just beyond a grade book line item. And when I think about those spaces in between, he was the one where maybe you're failing his calculus class, or he maybe just wrote you up for dress code violations. But the way he always led that conversation about maybe some not pleasant stuff was your goal last night in the JV soccer game was outstanding. And he was that one. And I always vividly remember there was a rolled up Kroger supermarket bag, and he'd always come. He would eat rail thin guy, swim miles a day in the summertime. And he would bring an entire grocery bag of snacks that he would little peanut butter crackers that would be consumed between periods while he was illustrating the next theorem on the whiteboard. I mean, he was just consuming snacks, but he was really there. Not just his math expertise, but his heart was the first one in and the last one out of the building every day.
How cool.
Oh, that's great stuff. He's Pat Mulloy at St. Paul School for Boys in Brooklynville, Maryland, right? That's the Baltimore area. I've been there. It's incredible. We're not done yet, though. Stick around. We're headed to the back porch for a little bit lighter and different conversation. It's going to be fun. I'll give you a hint. It has something to do with music. Stick around. Okay, we're back. A Little Crazy Podcast. We're so glad you're with us. Just a reminder, we hope you share about this podcast with others, and you can follow us. You can like us on Spotify, or just go to alittle.crazy.com, and sign up for our newsletter. You'll get all the information about guests and the upcoming episodes and lots of information. alittlecrazy.com, or follow us on social media. So we call this the back porch, a little fun, laid back shift of gears of conversation. And Pat's sticking around with Phoebe and I for this one because I know, Pat, that you're a music fan, and I think it's fun that you're ahead of an upper school, a high school, and it's easy to think for students to think like we parents or we heads of school, we're not really into things like music. You got your own sons, but you do. Do you have one? It doesn't have to be one. But can you tell us about a favorite concert that you've been to, or why, or something about some specific music you like?
So I'm kind of running on fumes right now, David, because just was it 2 nights? Last night, my wife and I discovered Zach Bryan.
Oh, yeah.
At the same time,
Yeah.
my wife kind of went deeper and deeper into Taylor Swift.
Uh-huh.
So speaking about vulnerability,
Yeah.
she had hers, I had mine.
Wow.
And so for me, the worlds that came together at Lincoln Financial Field in Philadelphia last night.
Last night, and by the way, for the record, you were sitting here in northern Mississippi, the college town of Oxford. Let's be clear. So
Yes.
Last night, you're in Philadelphia.
In Philadelphia. And throughout his spring and summer tour, special guests arrive. And so if I think about one of my first cassette tape memories was Born in the USA.
Oh, yeah.
And Bruce Springsteen.
Oh,
and
yeah.
my kind of, my worship at the altar of the boss. And he came on stage with Zach Bryan
Oh,
last night
my
for Atlantic
gosh.
City.
Wow.
My wife called it. She
Yeah,
was like,
she's
I
like-
think this is a maybe Jalen Hurts, maybe some Eagles
right.
players. But they're in training camp right now. That didn't work. So she said Springsteen. If it's not an Eagles player, it'll be Springsteen.
Wow.
And so he came out and closed it out with Revival. So I'm tired. I'm excited and love talking with you all today. But
Were any tears shed at the concert? Did you get emotional seeing your
I had to
childhood
turn
star?
my wife didn't catch. What I do have is I embarrassingly, on the boarding the plane today, I watched all the videos I took where I was belting out.
Uh-uh.
That
it's
is the
real-
most humbling
Yeah.
moment.
And
the
if
morning
the
after a
sound
concert.
engineer could like work on my little
man.
iPhone clips of like my not good voice belting
so
it out.
funny. It
Footage
felt
is good.
for
The
you.
audio's not.
I don't know about the person, not your wife, but
Correct.
the other person next to you. We
They
don't
were
know
all- we were
about
all
this.
screaming. Yeah.
Everybody. That is the thing these days. If you hit one of these hot groups, I mean, every person in the audience is singing every word. When I was a kid, we used to go to concerts. So we go see like Kool and the Gang, and maybe somebody's just kind of humming along, but it was.
Oh,
Nowadays they sing
people are
every
having their own
word.
concerts.
They're having their own concert. Phoebe, first of all, what's the first concert? You're young, so
I'm
you've got.
young.
Do you have one?
Oh, yeah. And I cried like a baby. I watched Carrie Underwood
Oh,
in
that's a
Atlanta.
good
We
one.
were a big Carrie Underwood family.
Okay, well, I
saw
get it.
her several times, and every time I was overcome with her fame and her beauty. I
Yeah.
just cried.
Yeah.
I had never seen
She
anyone
was big
famous
star.
before, and I was just shaking, and I
Wow.
had dressed up and had my outfit planned for days, and I think my mom curled my hair and let me put blush on, and I watched her. She was uplifted on this platform and kind of flew above the crowd,
Oh wow.
and I swear she looked at me.
Oh,
And I hold on to that. I was probably all the way up in the nosebleeds. And I was like, she saw me and
She
she's going to
saw
call me on
you.
stage. I thought she was going to call me on stage.
You're just waiting for the call.
I'm just like,
I know
I'm ready.
She saw me.
I'm ready.
Any minute.
I'm here to sing Jesus
That
Take the Wheel. I
is-
practiced in the car thinking I was going to sing on the stage.
Were you in middle school or what age are you?
I was probably like in 5th grade.
19. No. I'm
Oh,
kidding.
yeah, I was actually last week.
Yeah. Yeah, 5th grade. No, fifth grade's a big. I mean, a lot of young people don't even get to go to a concert.
I
at
know. I
5th
was
grade.
so lucky.
I go. So I grew up in a college town, right? And I'm this adopted kid, and my parents are a lot older than me. And I mean, in my view, like nobody thinks their parents are cool. I'm pretty sure mine were not. They were a lot of things. They were not that. And my mother. It's 1976, and it was, everybody here is too young to remember but me. But 1976 was this kind of garish year in the country in America of celebrating America's bicentennial year, which, by the way, when I was a kid and I'm 11 years old, and it's 1976, 200 years seemed like a long time. Now that I'm 58, I was like, that was so long ago. Now that I'm 58, I'm like, that was nothing. It was just 200 years?
Yeah.
I'm so old, this country was celebrating 200 years. And we did it so garishly. I mean, they sold American bicentennial log cabin syrup, and we had bicentennial quarters all in our pockets, and it was just bicentennial everything, and it was just this moment of both American pride and also kind of like we've gone too far of this. So now I'm going to tie into a concert. So I've got my parents, and my mother's my Sunday school teacher, and I've never heard her say a bad word, and I live in this college town. And there's these ads running on the radio, and it's like America in concert. And I'm thinking, Sister Goldenhair, bring it on, because I'm 11 and I listen to the radio. I mean, it's an AM radio and it doesn't sound good, but I know Sister Goldenhair and I got all these songs. And my mother stuns me. She turns around in the front of that station wagon. We're in this Ford LTD. The seats pop up in the back. And she's looking at me and my adopted sister, and she's like, do y'all want to go see America? And I'm like, do I? Get me to America. We're going to a concert on the Ole Miss campus. Are you kidding me? And my mother buys these tickets, and it's on a school night. And we walk into the Tad Smith Coliseum, and America takes the stage. Honestly, I'd never been around a lot of marijuana in my life. The whole arena is just a cloud of weed, and we're so stoned, and I'm looking at my mother all hazy, and I'm just like, this is so great. And she is clutching her purse, and her knuckles are white, and she's like, this is not what I thought it was. She thought it was a bicentennial program. She thought it was like you're a grand old flag, you're a high-flying flag. And she has taken her kids to this pot-smoking college town concert on a Wednesday night when we should have been at RAs and GAs and whatever else. And it was stunning. And by the time, like, they get to the best songs, I'm like, they play the best hits last. I've heard that. My friends have said they come last. She has just decided enough, and she grabbed this and pulled us out of there. But I got it wasn't the stuff in the air. It was in the air, but I was joking about seeing her hazy. What I was just looking down at that stage like, man, this is so good, because they had a lot of hits. I mean, to see 11 years old and get to America was big, but it was a complete confusion. Complete confusion. My mother totally dropped the ball, and she was more looking for log cabin bicentennial syrup.
That's not there.
So what kind of music, what concert do you want to go to next? We'll end on that. Like, what's on your list you need to go see?
I just like anything at Proud Larry's.
Okay.
I love it's a local restaurant here.
I took him there for lunch, his first visit to Oxford, Mississippi.
They turn it into a concert venue, and it's so fun.
Yeah, I saw Bella Fleck there years ago.
It's great.
It was
it's
phenomenal.
great. I just love going there. I don't care who it is. I just like being close to
you
them
like the
and
venue.
hearing the music.
Who's on your list to go to next? I think you got to repay it to your wife and go to Taylor Swift, maybe.
We've checked the StubHub kind of mortgage rates,
Yeah.
cheaper than StubHub.
Right.
Sturgill Simpson's one of my favorites
Okay.
too.
He's
And
great.
he's around this fall.
I would say I'd do some Chris Stapleton maybe.
Oh, yeah.
I'd do that. Thanks for sticking with us. It's a little crazy, the podcast. Follow us on social. We do need some friends. Like our, go to Spotify, like it, and sign up for our newsletter at alittlecrazy.com. It's very easy to do. It's painless. It's free, but you'll get all the information about this episode and more. Thank you so much for being with us, Pat and Phoebe. Thank you, as always, and come back and see us next week.